Hi, I'm Doug O'Brien. Welcome to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Many smart, capable people know exactly what they should do and still feel stuck. In this episode, I explore why insight alone doesn't create change and what actually needs to shift for progress to become natural and sustainable. Stay tuned. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. So why do smart people get stuck? Why do smart people have problems at all? If they're so smart, what's the big problem? But it's interesting, isn't it? That happens. Maybe you know someone like that personally. Maybe you know that someone like that very intimately, in fact. But it's true. Sometimes the smartest people get stuck because I think that it's kind of a situation wherein they think that they need to know like everything, be the most perfect expert before they can, put themselves out there as a situation, as a coach, or as a seminar leader, or as an author, or as an expert. It's interesting, but it's not a character flaw. It's actually something that's really kind of great because they don't want to just be up there talking if they don't know stuff. They don't mean talking out their um, that's a nice way to put that. But they want to be right. They want to be talking good stuff. They want to be sure that they're right. So some of the most intelligible, capable people struggle with this the most. Now, it might be that when you work with a person, you'll find that there is a person like this that you're going to work with. It may also be that you're that person. Maybe you're tuning into the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast because you think, okay, well, if I listen to one more episode, then I'll be ready to start my coaching practice, or then I'll be ready to really go for that high ticket offer. But being stuck is not a lack of discipline. It's not a lack of motivation. It's not a sign of um, lack of intelligence. Really, it's just it's a fact that insight doesn't necessarily make change, make integration. Insight isn't the answer. We're going to talk about removing unnecessary self-blame, because if intelligence was enough, most of us would have changed a long time ago. If intelligence was enough, people wouldn't be coming into your office for coaching because they just do it, right? So thank God it's not enough for those of us in the business. I've been waiting a long time for that sip of water. So knowing what to do is different from being able to do it. Part of why coaching works, I think, is it gets help people to do stuff, that they know they should do, but they're just not quite doing it for one reason or another. So, sorry to move things around my screen a little bit here. So there are two things that people need to do to change and to succeed. They have to stop doing things that aren't working. They should start doing things that will work. And a lot of people know this, and yet, like I said, having insight doesn't necessarily create behavior. So we need to understand the difference between cognitive understanding, behavioral capability or capacity, let's just say, and emotional readiness. Okay? So cognitive understanding, to read the books, to understand the situation, to do these things is great. You want to do that. You want to know things, right? But then you need to sort of say, okay, all of that information is really, really good. Now, what's the first thing to do? What's the first step? And then you need to take that first step. You need to actually do it, or you need to get your clients to do it. And willpower, as we'll discuss later, is not necessarily enough. It works great until it doesn't. So what I look to do when I'm doing coaching with people is to help people discover new patterns, new things that happen kind of automatically. So they don't have to muscle up the willpower. They don't have to talk themselves into it or find that motivation. There's a story I love to tell to my coaches about a famous artist. Perhaps you know him. I Google it and show you a picture of a painting he did. Let me just tell you a story real quick. Round about 1980 something, I first moved to New York City, and I like to go to museums. I like art. I'm an art guy. I love art. I really do. of my God, one of my most amazing experiences was going to art galleries in Paris, and seeing some Van Goghs and Monets things. And right here in New York City, we've got a lot of those things. So I went to this one museum, the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And I walk in, and across the lobby, there's this massive photograph of Philip Glass, big, you know, full framed as just his face, close up photograph, black and white photo of Philip Glass. Philip Glass is a modern composer. He wrote Einstein on the Beach and other compositions you might know, maybe not. But I thought to myself as a young composer, I said, what the hell do they have a picture of Philip Glass up over there for? Because I recognized him. So I walked across this lobby, and as I got closer and closer to this image, I realized it wasn't a photograph. It wasn't like a poster for Calvin Klein or something, It was a painting. It was this big, big painting, but it was what they call photorealism, right? So if you got right up close to it, it's like, oh my God, there's brushworks. This is a painting. Oh my God. It was painted by this guy named Chuck Close. Chuck Close. And he was famous. He got famous for doing that. I mean, he was alive. A lot of artists don't get into museums like that until they're dead, like Van Gogh or Monet. But, he was basically a young man in 1980. He was probably 40 or something like that. Pretty impressive, right? And he did a lot of paintings like that. That was his calling card, these massively big framed pictures of a person's face. Then around about 1993, something like that, I'm not sure exactly the date, he was at a party and suddenly fell over. People thought he was drunk at first. But it was just this sudden onset of this dread disease. I don't even know the name of it. A very rare thing. It left him completely paralyzed. He couldn't paint anymore, except that he did. He figured out a way. He was, paralyzed from the waist down and pretty much incapacitated everywhere else, but he could still move a little bit. And so he fashioned out this wheelchair, this electric wheelchair that he could operate with a toggle switch and get himself around. And he figured out how to make his studio such that the paint canvases were on this mechanized machinery that would move them. He put grids down. Well, actually, he hired people to do this for him, but he had these grids painted on there, and then he worked it out on his computer, like what would go into each grid. And so then they would help him to have this paintbrush velcroed to his hand, and he had this bunch of paints, and he'd wheel up to the thing, and the mechanism would turn the canvas so it'd be to the right little quadrant thing that he'd done, and he would paint in this thing. It's the first time I ever saw one of these paintings. It was kind of the same thing, except he was using colors now. But I walk in and say, oh, there's a picture of, say, Philip Glass. I think he did some Philip Glasses later on. I think he did a series of Philip Glass. But it looked much more impressionistic from a distance. Instead of photorealism, it was just like, wow, kind of interesting. But it's definitely Philip Glass. You could tell for sure. I thought, well, that's really interesting. It's kind of like a Chuck Close, because I was ignorant of the fact that Chuck had this going on. So I walk across the floor, and as I get closer and closer and closer, it's obvious that it's a painting, because pretty soon you can't tell that it's a face. It's just these globs of paint on there, So close up, it's just like, wow, amazing, colorful mass of paint. But as you get further back, you say, oh, I see, yeah, it's a face. And then farther away, it's like, oh, it's a very recognizable face. Chuck Close never stopped painting till the day he died. And his saying, and the reason I tell this story is because he said, you know what? He said, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us show up and get to work. I like to tell that story because, a lot of people search for the motivation, search for the reason to get out of bed, the reason to run in the morning. I like to make it so that you don't have to think about it. If you want to run in the morning, that's your chosen thing to do. Set it up so that it's natural and easy, right? So you this is literally what I used to do for myself. I'm telling I'm telling on myself here. I'm confessing. That's the word I'm looking for. I used to do this for myself because I was a rock and roll musician and I stayed up real late. Not a morning person. Um, if I wanted to run in the morning, and I did want to run in the morning because I was also a, wannabe marathon runner and I wanted to run marathons. So I would just lay out my running clothes in a pile that led down to my running shoes, which are at the bottom. So when I got up in the morning, I'd say, okay, put this on and put this on, just without thinking. Because if I had to stop and think about it, I'd stop. So I had to just do it without thinking about it. Just put it on, lace up the shoes, and go outside. I usually would wake up somewhere around a half mile up towards the park, you know. Um, Maybe it wasn't quite that bad. I think I might have had a cup of coffee before I did all that, but it's made it as simple as possible to make it happen. I often also tell the story about, if a fireman or woman is in the firehouse and the alarm goes off, there's no time to say, "Hey, anyone see my hat? Where's my hat? I got to put no, they just got it. They go boom, 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 slide down the pole, get on the truck, they're gone. A minute later, right? Alarm goes off a minute later, they're pulling out of the firehouse. It's got to be that kind of quick and efficient for you. So once you figure out cognitively what to do, you need to put it into a step-by-step action. And if there's any blocks at that point, you got to say, okay, what's stopping me from doing this? Is it something that's emotional? If there's a thing that comes up and goes, oh, I can't get up this early. Then you figure out a solution to that. You figure out how to get around that block or go through that block or eliminate that block, right? You need to figure out those kinds of things to take the step-by-step processes to make sure that this happens. So knowing is a mental event, but change is a whole system event. You got to take the action, but separate yourself from the thinking part and say, okay, what's my body going to do? And what's my emotional state of going to do this? So a lot of times people get into this thing where they think that if they understood this better, right, then they'd be okay. I've only really understood better if I was that expert I was talking about before. And people like this tend to have very large libraries of books they've read or intend to read or wish they could read someday. And sometimes people really want to buy a book and not read it, but get all the benefits from buying the book or tape or book on tape or whatever, what I'm talking about. Or they go to lots of seminars, they become seminar junkies, which as a seminar leader, I love those people. Um, and yet, it's like, yeah, go do it. Go do it. So insight without practice just doesn't rewire behavior. We need to figure out ways that we can practice doing it daily so that, sometimes understanding becomes like a subtle form of avoidance, So if you find yourself not doing something, say, well, what's stopping me? What's really in the way? And figure that out. And that's where coaching comes in. That's where you as a coach can be hugely beneficial to someone. Now, by the way, sometimes you can help them with motivation. There's difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, right? Intrinsic motivation is coming from inside. I'm motivated to do it. I don't need help with that, right? Extrinsic motivation is if they don't have the intrinsic motivation, you motivate them. You give them a reason to do it. That can be really useful because once a person starts doing things on a regular basis, they get into the habit of doing it, right? So it becomes intrinsic. They find that automatic thing. They get up in the morning, they go through that ritual of putting their t-shirt on and the shorts and the socks and the shoes, and then they go, you know, they get into the habit of doing that. It's not something they have to think about anymore. They just do it. Extrinsic motivation can help that work. So there are extrinsic motivations like money. Say if you don't do this on the first day, then you owe me $1. And every day that you don't do it, it doubles. So you need to do this every day in a row for 21 days. Let's just say that's a number you've agreed to because there's a mythological belief that if you do something 21 days in a row, it becomes a habit. So, okay, we'll just go with that. So you want to do 21 days in a row. It's actually more like 247 days in a row. They actually did a study. They did a study on this. Some people, they in England, because they wanted to find out. There's truth to the idea that the more you do it, the more it gets ingrained as a habit. That's really true. But it's not usually 21 days. For some people, it's just 3 or 4 days. Most people, it's a lot longer than that, 21 days, 36 days, 584 days. I don't know the longest one, but I think the average was somewhere like 127 days or something like 164. I'd have to look it up. Forgive me for not knowing. But it is still true that eventually at some point it becomes a habit and you don't have to think about it anymore. Like when I started flossing my teeth, I hated flossing my teeth. I loved this thing a friend of mine said. He said, if flossing was, something good for you, God would have made it cool. You know, oh man, that guy's so cool. He flosses. Oh, I wish I was like him. Make it cool. But when I started flossing, I forced myself to do it. But it was like before bed, after brushing, floss. Before bed, after brushing, floss. And I got into the habit of doing it. Now I can't go to sleep if I forget to floss for some reason, which I don't usually do. But if for some reason I do, I'll get out of bed and go back into the bathroom and floss because it's just weird to not do it. Right. So it gets in you at some point. But different ways of extrinsic motivation is to motivate somebody. For some people in coaching, there's a real thing about accountability. One of the reasons I think coaching works is because you become accountable to your coach, don't you? So he or she says, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the plan you're going to do. And so every morning you'll get up and run. I'm just using that as an example. Could be anything. But you're going to do this thing we've agreed on. And next week you'll report. Next week you'll tell me what you did. Maybe it's just one thing. Have it done. One thing before next week. Next week rolls around. It's like, oh shit, I got to get that done. Right. So getting your paper written the day before you have to hand it in to the teacher, you get it done. It might be late, but you get it done. So that's one form of extrinsic motivation that coaches do, this accountability thing. But I think it's also true that people need also to feel like an emotional safety to do things, that there needs to be a coherence, a congruence of our systems in order for something to become natural. It's kind of the difference between flow, where you're just going with the flow of things and everything's pushing you along in the right direction, versus trying to row upstream. It's the difference. You want to get to things where they're flowing. So your nervous system, your habits, you're all the parts. So one of the things that's great about NLP and knowing NLP is part of my essential coaching skills. One of the things I think is so great about it is it gives you these abilities to help people change in certain ways. There's a process in NLP called the integration of parts technique, where you literally put one part that's wanting this for you and another part of you that wants that for you, but they're in conflict. Integration of conflicting parts. You get them to talk to each other. You get them to negotiate. You get it so that they are on the same page. Sometimes they become one thing. They integrate so fully, there's no longer two parts, it's one part now. And that's great. Or two parts that work well together is just as good. But either way, you get rid of the conflict. So now we're rowing with the stream. It's great. You go really fast that way. You know what I'm saying? So we help people to get to the point where they remove obstacles. You can do that. You can remove those obstacles so things are flowing. And the things that you want to do, you just do. You just do. The question of how much. Right? So old patterns often exist to protect us. They're not there to sabotage us. They're here to keep us safe. We have to figure out what are the motivations there. Stress, threat, overwhelm, reduce access to choice. So sometimes we might know these things, or we're actually doing it, but then something happens, some sort of stress thing happens or overwhelm happens. So we go back to our old patterns. That happens a lot for folks. Sometimes the idea that I'm changing who I am becomes really kind of stressful for people. So your nervous system is always asking the question, is this safe? And if it's not, it'll stop doing it. Willpower works until it doesn't, right? And so it's great for short bursts, but it's not necessarily good for identity change. And ultimately, what we want to get to is a place of identity change. People become a runner instead of somebody who's trying to run every morning. People become an author or a coach or whatever it is that they're looking to do. That becomes their identity, right? So smart people are often good at pushing themselves, but eventually pushback happens as well and appears as procrastination, fatigue, or self-criticism. So one of the things we'll be talking about in the next few weeks, I know this is getting a little longer than these solo ones are supposed to be 15, 20 minutes, already 20 minutes, I apologize. But one of the things we'll be getting into is the ease process. I really created it for this reason. Patterns are adaptive, they're not defective. We want to create patterns that work for us. Milton Erickson used to say, discover their patterns of happiness, right? Don't worry about their patterns of dishappiness. Discover their patterns of happiness. Dishappiness, is that a word? Discover their patterns of happiness. Help them to integrate those, reinforce those, so they become natural and in flow. So ease, E-A-S-E, you can read about it in some of my things that I've handed out. We'll talk about it in the next few days, few podcasts to come, is a thing that says it doesn't matter if you, when you go for that run in the morning, again, just as an example, if you run 5 miles, which is, what you really should do, or if you run 2 miles, which is like, heck, you ran 2 miles, that's pretty good. Or if you ran a mile, it's like, hey, you ran a mile yesterday, the past few weeks, up until now in your life, you didn't run at all. You ran a mile today. Awesome, right? Little wins. Even if you run around the block, you did it. You got out of bed, you put your stuff on, you went outside, you ran around the block. How cool is that, right? So any of these wins move you in the right direction. Move you in the right direction. And that's good because you're moving in the right direction. I think it was, what's his name? I've forgotten. Old humorist, long, long time ago, said that even if you're on the right track, you're going to get run over if you don't keep moving. Keep moving on this right track. But we're moving here. We're doing stuff. A little bit more, a lot, a whole lot. It's great. But a lot of times people get stuck because they think they have to do that whole lot thing. They have to do the 5 miles, or they have to do an hour of book writing, or whatever it is. They think that this extraordinary level is the only level. It's that or nothing. So the ease process says, let's do something every day so that we get into new patterns and new habits. And I'm going to leave it there for you, but let you just know that really, honestly, stuck isn't failure, it's information. There's a great quote, great presupposition of NLP that says, there's no such thing as failure. There's only feedback. There's no such thing as failure. You tried doing something, you didn't get there, you learned something, right? So there's no such thing as failure. There's information, there's learning, there's feedback. So then you learn and you do something different the next time. So if this episode describes you, cool. I hope that you learned something from it and that it's going to help you, move on to doing something next. I'm available for coaching, so contact me. There's a lot of people that do coaching. I'm a firm believer in coaching. As I mentioned to you last week, I have a coach of my own. I talked to him today for an hour, or 45 minutes, I guess his coaching sessions are 45 minutes. Really, really valuable. Great work. So find a coach, get coached. And if you are a coach, help other people to get unstuck in their way, and you'll have a lot more coaching people coming your way. Thanks a lot for listening. Hope to see you soon. This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.